In my previous video, we looked at data migration versus database migrations. We learned that data migration deals with the movement of data from one database to the other, whereas database migration deals with the process of applying changes to the schema of a database incrementally as part of your software development lifecycle. In that same video, we took the example of Flyway as one of the utility that can be used for database migrations. In case you haven't seen that video, please do click on the link in the video description, or the link must appear on your screen right now. I would request that you go through that video and then you can come back to this video. Hi, I'm Bindu Kumar and I welcome you to my channel. In today's video, we are going to look at how to download Flyway, how to set up some sample migrations against an empty database, how to run these migration scripts, and also finally how to validate these changes in the database. Now here is what you can expect from this video. We are going to download the Flyway CLI or the command line utility. We are going to set up a new Postgres database. We are going to download some migration scripts from the GitHub repository. And then we are going to discuss what is the difference between these versioned and repeatable migrations and the concept behind them. We are going to review a sample configuration file that can be used for the Flyway. And then we are going to run the migrations using Flyway against this new database. And once it's done, we are going to review the schema changes, and also very important, we are going to discuss the concept of a file hash in Flyway and how it's going to affect the migrations. So let's get started. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to download Flyway. So for that, just open up any browser and type in Flyway CLI download. Now straight away you can see the very first link. It says command line Flyway product documentation. This is the link that we are looking for. I'll also have this link in the video description. So here the one that we need is the Windows version, because I'm recording this on a Windows machine. So Windows 64-bit, just click on this. So this is a zip file, and you will see it has already started downloading. I mean, you don't really have to enter any details here. If you want to, it's totally your wish. So as you can see, the download completed. Let me open up the folder. Now you can see the file has been downloaded. I'm going to copy that, and I've already created a separate folder, and I would request you to do the same as well, just to be aligned with what we are going to see in this video. So I've created a folder called 43 Flyway tutorial. You can ignore these other files that I've kept. These are PowerPoint files for a different reason. You don't need them. All right. So I've downloaded the zip file here. Now let's extract these. So I'm going to right click and we'll say extract all. And here in the path, I don't want this, such a lengthy path or, such a lengthy folder name. So I'm just going to shorten it to Flyway. Right, so I'm going to delete all of this and say extract. Now this is gonna take a minute. Okay then. So the extraction is done, and when you open up the folder, you can see a bunch of files, and what's very important is this particular file, the Flyway, right? This is the executable, and this is what we are going to run in a couple of minutes. So now that we have downloaded Flyway, the next thing is to set up a database. Now here you have you have two options. You might have Postgres installed on your machine. If so, let's create a new database there. Or if you have Docker, right, you can spin up a new Postgres database in a matter of minutes, right? I prefer Docker because you can easily get rid of the database without affecting anything or leaving any traces of the database on your system. So for this video, I'm going to use Docker, but in case you already have a Postgres database, you can use that as well. Okay, so I'm going to bring up the command line and let me run the command. Do not worry about the command because I would be adding this command in the video description, so you can always find it there. So let's give a name to this container. I'll call it some-postgres, and we will pass the environment variable, which is setting up the admin password. All right. So this is the command that I'm going to use to bring up a new Postgres database on my machine. So this will take a couple of minutes. So the image has been downloaded, and looking at the status message, it must be up and running. So let me verify that. So we can see there is indeed a container that's running with this particular container ID, and then the port is also mapped to the default Postgres port of 5432. Now, how do we verify if this database is actually running and if we can connect to it? So for that, I'm going to use the dbeaver. This is a database client. So I'm going to create a new connection to Postgres, and you'll see it's already, it has the default details like localhost, the default port of Postgres. So everything matches fine here. I'm going to just type in the password here. This is the same password that I mentioned when running the Docker. So we'll test the connection once. Everything looks good. So click on finish. And now if I expand this, you can see the database. It's available. Now what we'll do is let's create a different database, right? A new database within this particular instance. So to do that, I'm going to click on databases, select databases, right click on it and say create new database. And here I'll type in test Flyway. Now make sure that you also give the same name, because there are other steps that we will be doing, such as setting up the configuration file, where I have already given the same name. So either you give the same name so it matches with the configuration, or if you decide to give a different name, then you have to make sure you update that configuration file, which I will explain to you in a matter of minutes. So I've given test Flyway here. We'll click on OK. And you can see a new database has been created. Now, just to be sure, I'm going to expand it. And you see there is a public schema, but there's really no objects at all here. Right? There's absolutely nothing. So it's a blank new database. There's one thing that you want to do if you're using dbeaver, which is right click on the connection and click on edit connection. And here you want to go to the PostgreSQL tab and click on the show all databases. Click on OK. So it says, do you want to reconnect? Yes, I do. And yeah, now we are all set. So we have done two steps. We have downloaded Flyway CLI onto our machine. We have extracted the files. The second is we have now set up a new database, a new Postgres database to be precise. So the next thing that we want to do is we have to download some scripts, and these scripts are already there in my Git repository. So again, the link for this will be made available in the description. So here you can see this is my public GitHub repository, and there is one folder and one file that we need to download. So let's just click on the code and say download the zip. Click on save. This will just take a second. Now this will just take a second, and you can see the download is done. Let's open up the folder. And we're going to copy this. We're going to copy this file to the same new folder that we had created. Let's place it here. And then let's extract it. So you're going to say extract all. All right. So now the files are here. Now what we're going to do is from this downloaded files, I think it would be better if I open up two separate folders. So let me do that side by side. So here is the Flyway command line that we extracted earlier. From the file that you just downloaded from the Git repository, you will find a file called flyway.toml. Let's copy that. Into, you see a conf folder here. Let's paste it here. All right. And then the migrations folder. Let's copy that as well. And we will place that in the root folder, meaning it's the same path as where the executable is. So let me paste the folder here. Right. Now within this migrations folder are two subfolders, repeatable migrations and version migrations. Now let's understand what are these repeatable and version migrations. So to do this, let's open up any of the version migrations. Right. So here you can see what these, there are 10 files. Each file has a specific purpose, right? So there is a create table user. Then there is an add column, which is age to the user table. Then there is a create table post and so on and so forth. Now, if you observe, there is a certain sequence in these files, V1, V2, V3, and so on, all the way till V10. The sequence is very important. Why? Because these files have to be executed in that specific order. You cannot execute it in any other order. Take example of these first two files. First, we are creating a user table, followed by adding a column age to the user table. Now that means we have to assume that the age column, is not there in this first script. So let's verify that. So I'm going to click on edit with Notepad. And if you see here, the user table only has a user ID, username, and email. It does not have an age, right? So if we review the second script, you will see that we are adding the age as a new column to the table, which is why it's very important that there is a certain sequence in it, because if you try to execute the second script first, it's going to fail. It's going to say that the user table does not exist. You see, this is why we call it as version migrations. Version means version. When we talk about version, we talk about version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and so on, right? The reason we do that is version 2.0 always comes after 1.0, right? Version 3 always comes after version 2. And the reason is there are some changes that have been done on the previous version, and hence you package it as a new version. The same applies for the table changes here. Now, what kind of objects are meant for version migrations? Any object that holds data. Okay, so take a look at this user table. A user table, it's a table, right? Once you create a table, through a separate process, you might be adding data to the table. Now, it's not just a table, it is a table with some data, which means you have to be very careful in terms of making any changes to the table. Like, for example, you want to add a column, you can do that. But if you delete a column, if you delete an existing column, and if it has data in it, it is lost forever, right? So any object in a database that holds data, you cannot manipulate it, without consequences, right? You have to keep in mind what happens to the data, what is the change that I'm introducing. Hence, table is a very good example of a database object that has to go through these version migrations. Okay, and you can quickly view it here. We are creating a user table. We want to add a new column. That does not mean we are dropping the table and recreating. Instead, we are just issuing an alter command to that table. So that way we are maintaining the existing data in the table as is. The same thing with the third script. We are creating a new table post. We are adding a new column. Again, comment is a new table that we are creating, and so on and so forth. And here you'll see we are adding an index on one of these tables. But again, we are not dragging and dropping the table, right? Sorry, I meant we are not dropping and recreating the table. So you can see we are creating an index on the users table, but you will not see the entire table script here, which means that table is an object, is a database object, which has to be modified very carefully. I mean, you just cannot drop columns or rename columns or change the data types, because there is always a risk of data loss, which is why you always maintain a history, right? You maintain versions of it. Okay, so this is version migrations, and I hope I was able to explain it with this example. In case you still have any questions, feel free to drop a comment. Now let's come to the other type of migration, which is called a repeatable migration. Now, what is a repeatable migration? You see, it says in the name repeatable. Repeatable meaning you can repeat the script or repeat the execution of the script as many times as you want without any loss of data. That's what it means, right? Now take a look at the very first script. I'll open it with my notepad. And here you can see create or replace function. It is just doing a count of star, and finally that count is being returned from this database function. Now imagine any changes that you do here. Here we are doing a count of star. Maybe we will do a sum of some column, or we will do a max or min. I mean, we are changing this aggregation into something else, or maybe we are adding some filter clause here to exclude some data, right? No matter what change we do here, it's only going to affect the data or the output of this function, but it is not going to cause any kind of data loss, right? The data that is stored in any of the tables will remain as is, right? And that's the whole point of using a function. A function is simply supposed to return the data that's there in the database without actually making any changes to the data, right? So this is an example of a repeatable function or a repeatable migration, which means I can run these scripts 5 times, 10 times, 100 times. It really doesn't matter, because it is not going to cause any data loss. Hence, it's called a repeatable migration. And every time I run it, the code can exactly be the same, which is select count of star. Or maybe every time I run it, I'm making some minor changes to it, like changing the aggregation function, or adding a filter clause, or joining with other tables and whatnot, right? So as long as this database object does not cause any data loss, this is a good candidate to be created as a repeatable migration. Okay, now you can see the same thing here. Just like functions, there are some triggers that have been created as well. So create or replace function, which is returns as a trigger, and within that function we are creating a trigger on a table. And similarly, we are also creating a view. A view, as you know, is is a table, it's like a table, but it doesn't persist any data. It's just an abstraction over existing set of tables. So here you can see create or replace view post details. It's using the post, the users table and the comments table within it. But again, it's not making any changes to the data, which means I can drop and recreate this view as many times as I need without causing any data loss, which means this is a good candidate to be called as a repeatable migration. Okay, so that's the difference between a version migration and a repeatable migration. Version migration are the type of migrations where history is very important, sequence is very important. Repeatable migrations are those migrations where order is not really important. I mean, you can run them as many times as you need without any data loss. Also, another thing to note here is the version migrations have a very specific naming convention. So it starts with capital V followed by a number, and then there is a double underscore, right? And then the table name. So this naming is very important because Flyway uses this to recognize what are the version migrations and in which sequence they should be run. Similar thing with repeatable migrations. Repeatable, as I said, there is no sequence in them. So you don't really have to give numbers here. You just have to prefix them with R underscore underscore or a double underscore, right? And then the name of the function, or what is the action that is being done, whether it is to create a function or create a trigger and so on and so forth. So as long as you maintain this prefix, which is R double score, or in the case of version migrations, it's V number and a double underscore. As long as you keep this, Flyway will automatically understand that these are version migrations and these are repeatable migrations. So now that we have, now that we have seen what are version migrations and what are repeatable migrations, let's get started with configuring our Flyway, right? So before we do that, what we are gonna do is, from these migrations, let's go to the version migrations, and we are going to remove all these files, right? I have the downloaded folders here anyway, right? It's just that from the Flyway folder, you can see Flyway 10.4.1 under migrations. I'm going to just keep the first two files, V1 and V2, right? And then from the repeatable migrations, let's remove all of them. We will not have any repeatable migrations to begin with. Okay. So to review, we only have kept the first two files in the version migrations. Now let's set up the Flyway. So here earlier we copied a file called flyway.toml from which you downloaded from the Git repo and copied it here into the conf folder. Let me right click that and show you what it looks like. All right. So this is the format in which you specify the Flyway configuration. Now, what is this configuration? You see, Flyway needs information on where is the database? How do I connect to the database? What is the schema? What is the port? What is the username and password that I should use to connect to the database, and so on. So all of those details, you store it in this particular TOML file, right? And this is like the default file. There is a certain, let's say, syntax on how you structure this file. I'll not be getting into the details of it because that's a very lengthy subject. You can always refer to the Flyway documentation, but this, what you're seeing on my screen right now, is the minimum configuration you need to for Flyway to be able to connect to a database. So here you can see I'm mentioning the location where the migrations can be found. So here I'm saying locations, that is the key, and the value that I'm saying is in the root path, it should look for a folder called migrations, right? And then you can set up multiple environments. Like for example, you have a dev environment database, you have an int environment database, and so on. So here we just have only one environment. So we are calling it the default environment. And for that, again, we are specifying the locations as migrations folder. And we are also giving the URL, the username, and the password. Now, I know some of you may be thinking that, giving plain text password in a notepad is not the right thing, but I'm doing it only for the demonstration purpose. Of course, in a productive environment, you will not give password in a plain text like this. Instead, you will use secrets and integrations with secrets vault and so on. But that is beyond the scope of this video. So now that the initial configuration is set, we can go ahead. So let's go to the root folder where the Flyway command line is available. And from here, I'm going to open a new command line. And I'll just say Flyway, hit enter. So now it should validate if the executable is indeed available, right? So as you can see, it prints a command saying, you didn't give all the parameters that are needed for running Flyway. So now we'll give Flyway info -X. So this is supposed to sort of list all the configurations that are needed, right? And here you can observe some information here, right? There is a lot of information, but I'm just going to highlight some that are relevant for this video. So you can see here, found file system resource. You will see the 2 files that we have kept, right? Those files are being picked by Flyway, right? So what it does is, we only mentioned the path of migrations, right? We only mentioned the root path of migrations, but Flyway automatically looks at all the subfolders within it, and then it will list all the files as well. And it has automatically detected that, yes, there are 2 version migration files, right? So as I said, the naming convention is, it has to be v number __ and then a .sql at the end for version migrations. If it's a repeatable, then the prefix should be r __. And then scrolling down, you will see it is it's testing the connectivity to the database. Everything looks good because it's not throwing any errors here. So if I keep scrolling down, let's see, yeah, here. So you can see Flyway schema history does not exist yet. I will show what it is in a couple of minutes, but here it's saying create table user, add column age to user, and state is pending. So it says that 2 version migrations have been detected, but they haven't been executed on the database yet, right? That's what it shows. Now let's go ahead and run these. Now, before I do that, maybe let me quickly take you to the database one. And here, if I expand the tables, please do notice there is absolutely nothing here, right? The database is completely empty, which is the test Flyway database that we have created. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to run something called as Flyway validate. So the validate, think of it as doing a dry run. It's going to take the scripts and it's going to connect to the database, and then it's going to show you some information. So here you can see the schema history table, Flyway schema history does not exist yet, and it's also showing errors. Migrations have failed validation, and this is not an error from the tool. It's rather a way of saying that you have some scripts that have not yet been executed against the database, and which is why it's saying to fix this error, either run migrate or set ignore migration patterns. So what we'll do is we'll run the migration now. So to run the actual migration, we say Flyway migrate and hit enter. Okay. So you can see some information from the Flyway tool. It says successfully validated 2 migrations, and then you can see 1 line item for each of the version migrations. Migrating schema public to version 1 and then version 2, and then it also says successfully applied 2 migrations to schema. Now let's verify. Let's check the database to see what kind of changes have happened in the database. So I come back to dbeaver and right click on public schema, refresh, and there you go. There are 2 tables actually. Now first let's look at the users table, right? This is the table that has been created. So initially it created a table called users with 3 columns: user ID, username, and email. And then if you remember, the second script created the age column. All right, so it did an alter table and it did an add column, and that you can see here. Now, along with this, it has also created this Flyway schema history. I mean, this is not something that we set up. I mean, this was not there in the migration. So what exactly is this? Let's check that. So I'm going to right click and say view data. Now, please remember, this is a very important table where you are only allowed to see the data. I mean, you shouldn't be making any changes to the data in this table because this will break your future migrations through Flyway. Okay, so this data is only for viewing. You should not attempt to change any values here. Now let's understand what this table is all about. You see, every time you run migrations using Flyway, Flyway is going to keep a track of which all files were executed and the details about those files. Now, the first file, you see version migrations, that's the name of the subfolder, and this is the actual name of the file. So this was the script that was run, and from that it is able to detect that it is all about creating a table called user. This is the description. It is of the type SQL, and you can see installed by which user, what is the time it took for execution, when did the execution run, whether it was a success or a failure. And it also gives it a rank and a version. So this is just to track which of these files executed first. And then in a similar manner, you can see the second file as well, the v2 add column age to user. That is the second file to have run as part of the version migrations. Now what we are going to do is, let us add the other remaining files as well. So just give me a minute. So I'm back in the Flyway folder. We'll go to the migrations, and here is the version migrations. We had removed all the other 8 files and kept only the 2. So now let me add back. We'll say let's add from 3 to 5. So I'm going to copy this and paste them here. And we'll go back to our command line. Let me just clear up the screen. I'll say Flyway validate. So it's always a good practice to run a validate once, because validate is doing like a dry run, right? And here you can see a detected resolved migration not applied to database. So it's saying that there are 3, 4, and 5, right? So there are 3 files that are there but have been that have not yet been applied to the database. You can say migrate. Okay, so it says successfully validated 5 migrations, but successfully applied 3 migrations. Now this is what I'm talking about. You see, although there are 5 migrations in the folder altogether, Flyway detected that out of the 5, the first 2 have already run. So they need not be executed one more time. Hence, it only ran from number 3 till number 5. So that there are 3 migrations, v3, v4, and v5 have been executed. Now let's validate that by going to the database, and let me just refresh the public schema. And here you can see 2 new tables now, posts and comments. And not only that, we will also refresh the Flyway schema history. So let me close the window and click on view data, and you can see now there are 3 additional entries for the files that just executed. So you see, this is how Flyway keeps a track of which files have been executed against the database and when, right? Now what happens if I just run the migrations again, right? Let's see what happens. So we'll close this, come back to the command line, and we are going to say Flyway migrate again. So remember, I haven't made any changes. I have not added any files. I just said Flyway migrate again. All right. So you see, it still did a validation. Everything looks good. Schema public is up to date. No migration necessary. So it understands that you really haven't made any changes to any of the scripts. Neither have you added any new scripts. So there is no need to run anything. Okay. Now, one thing that happens is, let's say these tables have been created, right? This particular table, create table user, is already created. And now if I try to modify this file, right? If I say something like, okay, email was not supposed to be varchar 100, it should be 50, right? This is incorrect. This is not the way I should be making changes. Instead, I should be creating a new script called v6 alter column, right? But here what I'm doing is I'm trying to modify a script that has already been executed against the database. Let's see what happens if we try and do that, right? So I changed it from 100 to 50, and I'm going to save this file. Now let's run the validate. Now this time I'm not going to do migrate. First I'll do the validate. Okay, there you go. You see, validate failed. Migrations have failed validation. And it says migration checksum mismatch for migration version 1. What is the applied, the checksum that is applied to the database is this number, but the one that is that is available now in this folder is this one. So what exactly is this, right? Now to understand this, how Flyway is handling it, it is good to look at the Flyway schema history. You see, for every script that you submit, it generates something called as a checksum. Many of you must be aware of what is a checksum, but for those of you who are not aware, if I have to explain it in very simple terms, checksum, you can think of it as a signature, right? It's a unique number that is associated with the table, and this number has been derived based on the content in the file, right? So this is a file, isn't it? This v1 create table user.sql, it is a file, and in that file there is some content in terms of script, like a create table script. Based on the characters that are there within that file, it generates a signature, a unique number, which is called a checksum. Now, of course, if I try to modify, if I modify that file, even if you change one character within the file anywhere, the signature changes, right? The signature of the file changes. So this is how the Flyway is able to understand that when you first executed the file, it had a specific signature. Now when you're trying to, when it's trying to validate, it sees that the signature has changed, which is not right, because this file is already executed and you're not supposed to make any changes to a version migration file, right? So this is Flyway's way of stopping you from making changes to existing files, right? So what we're going to do is let us run the migrate and see if anything happens. Okay, so as you can see, the migration failed. It says you cannot migrate, and basically it's showing the same error message as it showed when we ran the validate command. So what we're going to do is, let us revert those changes and see if it succeeds now. So the validate is working fine. Let me run the migrate. And the migrate works fine as well, although it did not do any migrations. Why? Because all the 5 scripts have already been run. It did not show any error either. So it's a way of saying that the files that have been executed before are matching with the files that are currently available in this particular folder. I hope this was, you understood how this version migration works and why the checksum is so important. And this is how Flyway, understands if a file has been accidentally changed. So now that we have seen it, let's add the remaining files. So we have from v6 to v10, which I'm going to copy it to here. And also now we will introduce the repeatable migrations. So I'm going to copy all the repeatable migrations to this folder. Now let's run the Flyway validate first. It should now throw a bunch of errors in red text saying, there are scripts, but you haven't run them. So now we will do the migrate. All right. So as you can see, the Flyway ran the scripts starting from version 6 all the way till version 10. And after that, it also executed the repeatable migrations, right? So it says migrating schema public with repeatable migration along with the name. Now let's look at the database. If I were to right click on the public, click on refresh, you see additional tables like categories and others. You will also see some views. There must be some functions as well that have been created. And we will also review the Flyway schema history table. So you can see the list of all the files, the version migrations as well as the repeatable migrations that have run here, along with the date and timestamp. Now what's interesting is the repeatable migrations do not get any kind of a version. Why? Because repeatable migrations are, well, repeatable, right? They can be executed as many times as you need. Now let's try that. We'll say Flyway migrate once again. Now you will see that the version migrations or the repeatables will not run. I mean, nothing ran. Why? Because we haven't made any changes, right? But let's make a change. So we'll go to the repeatable migrations, edit with Notepad, and let's say I'll just say where 1 equals 1, right? So I have made some change to this file signature, which means this file should be executed now. So let's try that. So I'll say Flyway migrate, and exactly 1 repeatable migration should be run, and it must also appear in the schema history. So do you see this message? It says successfully applied 1 migration to schema public. Let's review. So I'll close this, right click, view data, and you see the get post count appears twice here because this is the script that we updated, and you can also see the change in the checksum. So the moment I added that where 1 equals 1, the signature of the file has changed. And that's what you see here. Since the signature changed from the previous one, Flyway realized that this file has indeed changed and it should be run. And that's why it executed it. So unless and until there are changes to a file, Flyway will not run it again. It only runs it when there are indeed changes. And what I said now is applicable for repeatable migrations. Whereas for version migrations files that have already been executed, you are not supposed to make any change because it throws an error. The only way to, let's say, correct something, like for example, you added a column but you want to remove it, you don't make changes to the existing. Instead, you create a new version migration like V11 and say modify table or alter table, remove column, right? Something like that. So any changes, you have to continuously create new version files rather than modifying any of the existing version migration files. Whereas in the repeatable, you are allowed to update the existing file, and if the checksum has changed, then Flyway will automatically apply that migration to the database. So with this, we have come to the end of this video. So just to quickly summarize, in this video, we learned how to download the Flyway command line utility, which is open source and freely available for anyone. We installed a new database and created a new database called Test Flyway. I chose to use Docker, but you can install Postgres on your Windows or Linux machine and use that as well. We downloaded some migration scripts from the GitHub, the link for which you will find it in the video description. We looked at what are versioned and what are repeatable migrations and how they are different, and that version migrations are specific for, let's say, tables, whereas repeatable migrations are for those objects that do not hold data like views, functions, procedures, indexes, and so on. We also looked at the configuration file, a simple configuration file for Flyway that will allow the Flyway to discover the database and connect to it. Finally, we ran the migrations through Flyway using the validate command as well as the migrate command. We looked at the schema changes that happen to the database and how it is stored in the Flyway schema history. So the Flyway schema history is a table that is specific to Flyway. I mean, it's a table that Flyway creates in the database and uses it to track what changes have been done to the database over time. And very important, we looked at the file hash concept or the checksum, how the checksum is used by Flyway to determine whether a version migration file has been deliberately or, let's say, accidentally changed, or a repeatable migration has been updated and it should be run again. So the file hash concept or the checksum is a very critical feature of Flyway, which it uses to understand or decide whether migrations have to be run or no migrations. I mean, there has been no changes, so nothing has to be done. So this was a quick recap of what we did in this video. Thank you for sticking till the end of this video. I hope you found this useful. I understand that this was a lengthy video, but I wanted to explain every step in a detailed manner. And what I would request you to do is that you pause the video at every step while you do a hands-on. I mean, just don't watch this video end to end, but pause the video, set up your own database, download Flyway on your computer and try it out. It's a very simple utility, very easy to use. The documentation is pretty good as well. And once you do the hands-on with a couple of scripts, let me tell you, you will be amazed at how easy it is to manage all your deployments through this utility. If you found this video useful, please do give a like, share this video with your friends and colleagues, and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop a comment in the video and I'll be happy to answer you. Thank you. One other thing, many of you have reached out to get a list of the videos that I have made so far. Although the YouTube channel is there, you can only browse it by the title or the thumbnail. So a much better way of finding out all my videos is by looking at this Google Sheet. In this Google Sheet, I have the title, the language, the description of the video, along with some tags. So you can use any of these fields to search for content and locate the specific video that may be relevant for you. So you'll find the link for this Google Sheet in the video description. Happy learning.